we are going to dive right in. Hopefully some of you have seen the poll kind of running, but just to kind of get an idea where everybody is this morning, or at least it's morning where I am, I'll say that. But before we get started, feel free to post your answer to that in the chat as well. So if you are not here for the Neo4j Aura free tier, you're on the wrong day probably. We have several trainings running this week. Yesterday kicked us off, and I'm day 2. So feel free to sign up for anything that's the rest of the week. They'll run through Friday. So we're going to talk about Neo4j Aura free tier, what it is. You will get hands-on experience from this. And my name, as Alex said, is Jennifer Reif. I'm a developer relations engineer at Neo4j. We do have, a good couple of hours this morning, but please do feel free to reach out to me or any of the Neo4j team if you have questions after the session or later in the week or on even after that. So, okay, so this is kind of what we're going to go over today. Again, very hands-on today. We'll cover just some intro stuff up front. Then we'll talk about graphs in Neo4j, which if you were at yesterday's session on the intro to graphs, most of this will be familiar. So we won't spend too much time here, just kind of get everybody up to speed in case you're new or want a refresher. Then we'll talk about Neo4j's database as a service. We'll go into importing data and interacting with the data in Aura and what that means. We'll connect to the database and show how we do that with something like Aura in the cloud. And then access and connect an application, we'll see how to do that. And then we'll do just a little bit of wrap up stuff, resources, et cetera, there at the end. So full 2 hours for sure. We'll try to have a gap or two, kind of a downtime, but it will move along pretty well. So with that, we're going to kick off right off the bat with a hands-on. Basically, all this is, we're just going to log into the Aura console, and we're going to start kicking off our Aura databases. So depending on your internet speed and stuff, it may take a minute to create the Aura database and spin everything up. So we are going to go ahead and do that. So I will walk through all of this. So let me size this up so it's a little bit easier to read, hopefully, for you. If you go to console.neo4j.io, so I can go to another tab and type it in, console.neo4j.io. This is there's also a link there in the slide, I guess, too. This is the main Neo4j Aura console, which of course I'm already logged in on another page. But I have currently 2 databases running. If you're new to this, it'll ask you to log in and create an account. I've already logged in this morning, so it skipped that step for me. So if you don't have a Neo4j account, feel free to sign up with either one of the pre-listed options like GitHub or Google or one of the others, or you can also, I believe, create your own name and password, but don't quote me on that. I'm actually not for sure. So once you get in there, you'll see just kind of an empty screen here with just the button for create a database. When you do click create a database, then it should show you the options that you are allowed to select. Aura free, I've already opened an Aura free instance, so that's why it's grayed out for me. It should not be for you if you don't have another instance running. But you'll need to select this, and then you have an option for Aura Professional. We'll talk a little bit more about Aura Professional, but this has a cost to it, so I don't want you to incur costs today. So just stick with the Aura free instance. But you'll select that one. And then it should automatically select, there should be an option for a free instance that automatically shows up at the top. Again, because I already have my free instance done, it does not show that option for me. So anything on up to larger sizes, it will charge you for, just to notify you now. Then you can fill in a database name. I have mine named, I think it was the Aura free training. So this is the name that's going to show up here when you create your database instance. Name it something that makes sense, easy to remember, that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated or businessy necessarily. This is the default. If you've been on Neo4j Cloud or Neo4j Aura for a long while, you may see an option for 3.5. That's our previous version. But if you're completely new to Neo4j Aura, that option won't even show up. So Neo4j 4 is the standard version. I think we're currently sitting on 4.3. So stick with that. And then you can choose your region, whatever might be closest to you. This is actually not the closest to me. I think it must just be the default, but you can choose from a variety of options there, kind of all over the world. So if you want to choose a region that's closest to your location, that's great. And then this is telling me it will charge me because, again, my free instance is already taken up. But there should be some kind of check mark at the bottom probably. And then you can click Create Database here at the bottom, which will not hopefully be grayed out for you if you don't have a database running already. So once you do that, it should kind of go back to this page, and it will have whatever you named your instance, and it should have a little free marker out to the right side of that. And then it will kind of have a gray dot here and say starting or processing or something like that, that it's creating the instance basically. And that will take a few minutes to kind of spin up. And so while all of that is happening, then we will kind of go into slides and talk more about that. So hopefully that was clear enough and helpful enough to get you guys all started. So again, console.neo4j.io, you'll need to go there. You'll probably need to create an account if you're totally new to Neo4j or Aura in general. And then once you get that set up, then you should be able to come in and click Create Database, choose the option for Aura Free, and then it should automatically set a size for you. And then fill in a name you want it to have. The version should be default. And then if you want to change the GCP region it's running in, that's totally up to you. And then there may be a checkbox at the bottom for you to click and then Create Database. At no point should it ask you to enter your credit card. If that is the case, then you've chosen a wrong instance section, and feel free to ask a question or two. We'll hopefully get everything all set up and ready to go for you. Okay. So with that, I will jump back into slides. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ping the chat with those. And I will dive back in here. And that gets us started already with our hands-on portion for the morning. All right, so let's talk a little bit about graphs in Neo4j. Again, for those of you who were in yesterday's session, this should be a refresher. For those of you who are new, this will kind of bring you up to speed on kind of the technology that we're dealing with today. So what is a graph? This is a very formal definition of it here, but it's a set of discrete objects, each of which has some set of relationships with other objects. The typical problem that we always give is the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem. So this was back in the 1700s. A mathematician named Leonhard Euler wanted to solve this problem that actually is very graphy. He was looking at the city of Königsberg, Prussia, and there were 4 land masses, as you can kind of see in the center image there, and 7 bridges. And he wanted to see if you could cross all 7 bridges and come back to your starting point. And this study, this research, this problem formulated the foundations of graph theory, which is then what technologies in the last 10 or so years have been built upon those ideas. So this is kind of where a lot of this originated. And so graphs really show how data is connected. So our sample image here, we just have just a few nodes of relationships, which we'll talk more about that terminology. But you have blue nodes that are people, you have the red nodes are companies, and your green nodes are technologies. And then we add relationships that tell us how these entities are connected to one another. So for instance, the blue Jennifer node there in the middle works for Neo4j, likes Java and graphs, is friends with several other people there. And so then we come to understand a little bit better about Jennifer's world, about her network, and about the things that she likes and does on a daily basis. So if you're familiar with other types of databases, let's take a look at kind of the differences in the structures. Going from a relational database there in the upper left-hand corner, if you want to look at what departments an employee works for, you would typically have probably an employees table and a departments table, and then you would need a lookup table, a join table, associative entity table, however you want to term it, there in the middle, then would cross-reference both those tables. So for instance, I have an employee named Alice. I want to find out what departments she works for. And so I would go over to that join table, look up the ID for that row, and then find all the other rows that she's connected to there in that join table, and then go on over the departments table with those reference numbers and find out the meaningful values on the departments table. Graph breaks down this structure and basically pulls it apart, and you have individual pieces that are directly connected to one another. So the Alice node there actually has a physical relationship straight to the individual departments that she works for. If you're familiar with other types of database structures, so other NoSQL, things like key value store, maybe even document, the key value there in the upper left, we have a key tied to a value and possibly other keys. And then there in the lower left, the document structure, things like MongoDB and others that have this kind of nested document structure there, as you can kind of see. So sub-documents or sub-nestings. And so basically what the graph is doing in both of these cases as well is pulling apart those kind of categories or groupings that we've kind of organized data on the left-hand side, and we're pulling this all apart and saying these individual pieces are directly connected to these other individual pieces. So again, teasing out that structure into individual components and then directly tying those together. So what does graph have to offer? What does it give me? That kind of broken down structure. Basically, graphs add context and meaning, which we saw, a couple slides ago with the sample graph. But again, here we have this person, Jennifer, and we can better understand, okay, she's connected to this other person named Michael. And not only maybe she could work with this person, maybe she shared an Uber with this person, maybe she happens to go to the same coffee shop as this person, but no, we're actually saying, no, this person is friends with this other person and has been since a particular date. So then we are able to kind of qualify that relationship and better understand, well, okay, this person would be a good person maybe for a reference, or maybe to get an insider information on how Jennifer operates, or et cetera. And maybe other people wouldn't have that information. And so then you can better understand and target what you need and what to get out of it. So better results for your queries is kind of the long scope here, the long game. And so again, your other relationships, Jennifer works for a particular company, contract, or maybe just likes the company or follows them on Twitter, et cetera. No, we're qualifying this relationship as this is who she works for on a daily basis. And again, same idea with the technology. There's tons of different relationships that could be in effect there, and we've actually qualified it with a very specific one here. So let's look at just a couple of graph use cases. Social networks, one that often people think of, so how people connect to other people and maybe how they kind of break apart. Social media is a very common one to see here, but there's other cases in this as well. It could be maybe work relationships, or it could be organizational hierarchies, or it could be a variety of other things there. So just really looking at how people connect to one another, or how they don't, maybe. Bank fraud is not only taking information of people, but now you're lumping in other types of data as well. So things like bank accounts, credit cards, personal identifying information, loans, anything that's basically around a person's financials, and trying to understand if there are abnormal patterns in people's behaviors. So if you have this particular person, okay, maybe they pass a few $1,000s or whatever the money is back and forth between one another. That might not seem maybe unusual, but if they're also sharing a social security number and maybe the same address, et cetera, or maybe they're sharing a phone number with 4 or 5 other users, that might look kind of odd and suspicious there. So tying not only people, but now other types of information together to see, is there a pattern that might be abnormal or something that shouldn't be happening in the network? So uncovering fraud there. Network and IT operations, I really like this one because it's actually a physical representation of a graph, as well as kind of that virtual in database graph as well. So looking at devices and how they physically tie to one another with cables and routers and switches and through buildings, etc., and better understanding, okay, maybe this cable needs upgraded, maybe we have a slow speed, or maybe a squirrel got in and chewed a wire. And so trying to find out what devices that impacts, where things might be improved or need upgraded. Again, it's showing this physical network as well as showing it virtually in the database for you to query. Identity and access management. This one I find super complicated in a lot of other types of data stores, but I think Graph makes this a whole lot easier. So tracing back how a person gets a particular role and why they have it. So understanding, okay, this person has this role and this person granted it to them, but we're not really sure when this role was given, or it includes read to this and write to this and all sorts of crazy complex information. But with Graph, with these relationships, you take those individual pieces, okay, write to this, read to this person has access to grant, this person is getting the access, this is the role they were given that gives them these other things. You're able to trace exactly where this access is coming from and why it was granted in the first place. And then finally, where a lot of graph technologies got their start is graph-based search. So trying to provide better recommendations or search results for anything that a person might be looking for. We like to tease at Neo4j that graphs are everywhere. So here's just a few use cases that are kind of scattered all over the place. The internet is one. So these are pages on the internet that link to other pages. Those are the relationships, so they're linking. And so you kind of see a cluster of nodes there in the middle that are kind of larger, have a very thick relationships. This is where a lot of activity is happening. So you have a lot of links to those pages, as well as links maybe away from those pages. Other pages are linking into those, etc. So these might be, major pages like big company websites or Google or YouTube or other places like that, where a lot of people hit and a lot of people link to those as well. Bank fraud, we already kind of talked about, but just to kind of show an example here, we have different account holders, we have kind of personal identifying information, and trying to trace through kind of a typical graph of typical financial habits of a user and trying to see which users might not be legitimate users, and where you have kind of either money moving around or people trying to be people they're not, identity theft and things like that. Here's a couple kind of unusual cases you might not think of. So the NASA space satellites, obviously very expensive equipment and kind of intangible in the fact that they're huge and they're so far away, you can't really physically work on them or know what's going on with them. And so understanding where they are in orbit, what time, how long they've been up there, if something gets misaligned, what might be close by that could communicate with it and help get information back, etc. When things might be retired, and so you would lose a particular device in space orbit, etc. So very important to understand where stuff is, what's happening, what's going on with it, but not something you would normally think of as needing to be stored in a database, I guess. And then finally, this is kind of a fun, lighthearted one, but it's the Game of Thrones family tree. This can be used in actual business use cases, not just for this sort of pop culture fun stuff. So things like genealogy trees or organizational hierarchies and things like that. Understanding again how people kind of operate and kind of the categories and groupings they might have. So when the TV series first came out for Game of Thrones, people were taking the data from the books as well as the data they had from what was of the TV series at the time, and they were dumping it in, trying to see if they could predict, who might get married or who was related to whom, or who might sit on the Iron Throne, who would die, who would battle somebody else in other houses, etc. And so again, really just understanding how people kind of form habits and behaviors that either tie them together or break them apart, or things that might happen to them later down the road. Okay, so Neo4j is known for being whiteboard friendly. This is the data model that we're going to deal with today. So typically when you start out with a new data domain, at least for me, even before I knew Neo4j, I would go to the whiteboard and draw out either the process flow or the data domain itself, or kind of anything. I would just immediately go to the whiteboard. It's easy to draw things out. even if you're not that great of an artist. So this is exactly what I did here. I was looking at a Venmo payment system, which is what this data model is showing. And I went to the whiteboard, or in this case, a piece of paper with a marker, and drew out, okay, we have a user who sends a payment. They make that payment using a particular application, whether that's mobile, desktop, etc. And then they make that payment to another user. So another user gets paid out of that. So actually pretty simple data model, but this kind of categorizes all my data. And then I might go and make it a little prettier, use a tool like arrows, if you guys are familiar with that. So sort of kind of a data modeling or data drawing tool that would make it a little nicer. I could show maybe management or my colleagues or business users and kind of say, this is the data model that I'm thinking that we're dealing with here. This is how I understand the data to be connected, etc. And then when I go in and actually store the data in the database, this is the result that I get. And this is kind of a blurry image because I've got it stretched out so large. I need to fix the pixelation on that. But you get a user sends a payment to another user, and that payment was made using a particular application. So you can see it looks exactly like the data model that I had when I drew it out on the whiteboard in the first place. So this is what Neo4j and other graph vendors mean when they use the term whiteboard friendliness. Drawing your data model and storing your data model exactly how it is in the real world, exactly how you would draw it out on the whiteboard. Okay, so let's look at how then we build up our graph. What makes up a graph? We can kind of see we've got circles and lines, but that doesn't really mean much to us. So you have nodes, which are your vertexes, or you can think of them like objects or nouns, and you have two people, and you have a company, and you have, for instance, our technology graphs there. So these are our nodes, these are our entities. And then we have relationships, which are our edges. So these are the connections between the nodes. These say how these two entities are connected to one another. So you get relationship types there, like works for or likes or is friends with. And then we do also have relationship directions that you can kind of go from node to node and follow kind of a path with. Then labels, which are kind of your node categories, or I like to think of them like node categories. These are entirely optional, but they can really improve performance of your queries, as well as when you start doing visualization and things, it makes it easier to look at and easier to kind of organize and categorize the data. So again, entirely optional, but it is very helpful for visualization as well as queries. So things like person there on our blue nodes and employee. Notice we can have more than one node category there, or label. And so we can kind of segment and kind of group our entities in different ways if we want to. Same thing with the technology and the hobby there. We're giving a little bit more detail, adding some other labels on there. So if we search for all hobbies in our database, that would pull maybe a different subset than just searching for all technologies. Properties help enrich the node or relationship. You do not have to store nulls in Neo4j. That's kind of one of the more unusual things is you may be used to kind of storing an empty string or a null value somewhere in a database. And Neo4j, if you don't have that data, you just don't store it. So it doesn't take up unnecessary space. And these just help, again, kind of add more metadata and more detail and help add context to the data model that you already have. So things like the person name there, again, understanding who these people are, maybe even just by their name. A company name, again, tells you maybe what business they're in or what industry or what technology they're dealing with. And then the type of technology for graphs there. Again, you could have lots of different things for technologies there, but it's, again, adding more metadata and detail to that. So let's talk a little bit about the Cypher query language. There's a variety of ways that you can go about talking to Neo4j or talking to graph databases, but Cypher is kind of one of the more common or easiest entry points, I think. So Cypher query language is kind of like SQL for graphs. It's very functional as well as visual. It's based on ASCII art, so it looks very pretty. However, don't be fooled. It actually is very functional and very powerful as well. There's a lot of stuff that's been built in already, and things are continuing to be added every rendition of Neo4j, every version release. So it is a declarative query language, and that just basically means it focuses on what to retrieve, not how to retrieve it. So you tell it what you want, the data kind of format or data that you're looking for, and it will determine the best way to go about getting that data and return that back to you. So let's take a look at an example. What if we wanted to create this pattern in the database? So basically insert or do a write. We want to have Jennifer works for Neo4j. We want to store that in our database. So the query right down there below, or the statement, is what we would use to do that. We use the create keyword, which is kind of like insert if you're familiar with SQL. And then we need to create two nodes in a relationship, right? So our two nodes are surrounded by parentheses. And the way I like to think of it is if you bring the parentheses together, that forms a circle, which is exactly how it's drawn in the visualization right above it. And so that's kind of easy to remember and kind of a nice key. Again, very visual, based on ASCII art. And then there in the middle, we have the relationship of works for. You can see kind of the arrow syntax there with the brackets kind of box around the relationship type, quantifying that relationship there. Then inside our nodes, we have a little bit more detail. So we have our labels that kind of categorize these nodes. We have one person, we have one company. So they're different types of entities. And then we have a property that, again, adds a little bit more value to this entity and says, okay, we have a name of a person's name, and then we have a name of a company name here. So this is how we would insert the data to Neo4j. Then what if we wanted to query that back out and read it? We would write this statement here. And so we use a match keyword, which is kind of like a select or read, if you will. And then we know we have a person named Jennifer. That's our first node there. We know there's a works for relationship, but maybe we don't know what node is on the other side of that. So we're going to put in a variable named whom there. And then we're just going to return anything that the database has about whom. And in this case, we know we're going to get Neo4j back because that's what we see in our visualization, and that's what we just inserted on the last slide. But this is kind of how you would do answer this question for me, and Neo4j is able to, Cypher is able to read that back and say, this is what you're looking for. Okay, so now let's talk Aura. That was a lot of prep work now to just get to Aura, but that really forms the foundation of what Aura does, what you're going to be doing when you talk to Aura or when you work with it. And so that kind of sets us up to then do a lot of cool stuff now. So Aura is Neo4j in the cloud. It was announced all the way back at Nodes 2019. But free tiers is not that old. It's actually new this year. And so Neo4j Aura is a database as a service. So there's lots of options out there for database as a service and all different types of databases. But Neo4j Aura is entirely Neo4j managed. So you're not hosting it on somebody else's cloud. Neo4j maintains all the responsibility there. So that means that you're going to get reduced maintenance and provisioning. So you don't have to mess with those skills. You don't have to staff and skill train your internal employees to handle all the infrastructure and running of a database. And then you're also going to avoid downtime and improve reliability. Again, because you're letting the experts who know databases or who know Neo4j best run that and take care of that for you. If you're interested, how we determine cost is on resource usage. This is basically like every other cloud database provider out there. Most of them run off of resources. So the resources that you use and such is how you're going to be charged and is going to affect what you pay or the cost of it. So if you're on the professional and enterprise tiers, that's what you'll be charged based on. Okay, so these are currently the 3 Aura tiers that are available. Aura Free, which we're going to be focusing on today, entirely free, good for development projects, gives you one database. There is a limit on the graph size, but I have yet to run into an issue with that. All of my demo data sets so far have fit on that, no problem. You're also going to get multi-tenant infrastructure and the APOC library, at least the APOC core, which is the bulk of it. And then you also have Aura Professional and Aura Enterprise. So if your business is looking for something more robust, better SLAs, larger instances, better support, things like that, there are those upper tiers that will allow the business to do that. Just have somebody ping sales or somebody on our side, and we'll get you started there. But we're going to focus entirely today on Aura Free. I just wanted to mention, in case people are looking for their businesses, those options are there. Okay, so if you've been around Neo4j, you might know about Neo4j Sandbox, or you might have seen a few, ads, or maybe on our developer guides talk about Sandbox. And so, what are the two differences, or what are the differences here, and why would you choose one or the other? Aura Free is going to be a forever instance. Neo4j Sandbox, meanwhile, is only a temporary instance. You're going to get 3, maximum of 10 days there. Aura Free, you're also going to get the latest features and the latest version with that, because everything's rolled out to Aura before it's basically rolled out anywhere else. So you're going to get the latest, greatest stuff. It's easy to roll things out and kind of test and move back if needed. So you're going to get the latest and greatest there, where Sandbox is actually managed by my team. And while we do a phenomenal job with that, it is based on, when our resources free up and have time to upgrade to the next released version. So if you're just hitting the drop of Neo4j, let's say 4.4 is what's going to be next, you go the day of to open a Sandbox, and it's not going to be running 4.4, most likely, unless somebody had a late night and felt like updating Sandbox overnight. So that is going to be the thing there. You may not get the absolute latest and greatest there, where Aura, you're always going to get the latest and greatest thing that we're working on. The other thing to keep in mind, Aura is going to be a completely empty database, so you'll need to import some kind of data. We have lots of guides that can help you dump data into that, no problem, but Sandbox usually comes with a preloaded data set. So if you're completely new to graphs, entirely from scratch, then Sandbox may be a better way to go, just to kind of play with some things for a few days to kind of get a feel for it. But for everything else, I would definitely lean Aura on that, because you can go and return to your data or take a look at it, weeks later if you need to. A little bit about Aura versioning. So I mentioned that Aura always gets the latest stuff. So the version is handled and upgraded in the background. You never have to worry about that. Your Aura version matches the Neo4j major version. If you didn't notice when you created the database in the beginning there, it just said Neo4j 4. It didn't specify 4. Whatever. And so you're going to deal with the major versions there. So you probably won't see any change on the front until you hit Neo4j 5, which I don't know when that will be. But there will be incremental versions behind the scenes that you won't ever know about, really. Hopefully. Downtime, at least with free tier, is very little. You'll always get the latest features. I think there has maybe been 2 minutes one morning when I logged in that it was trying to update something, and so it was down for a minute or two first thing in the morning, at least my morning. But I haven't ever seen any other downtime so far, and I've been running this instance for since probably late spring, early summer already, and used it quite a bit. So there's very, very little downtime with that. With Aura Enterprise, Aura Pro, you're actually going to get even less because there's some other things being handled in the background there. With Aura Free in features, as far as features, whatever's in the Neo4j version, you're going to get in Neo4j Aura, with a couple of exceptions currently. RBAC is not available, so role-based access controls. And then multi-DB is also not currently available in Aura. However, there's some other things that you can do to compensate for that. So getting around that, those things are being worked on. It's just something that's not there as of yet. Integrations currently, APOC core, you're going to get out of the box with free and everything else. You're not going to get the extended. There's some security things that we've locked down. And so that's why there's certain procedures that we haven't granted access to Aura just yet. Bloom, you do have a limited number of users that you can join, but that is available, and we'll walk through that. And there's more integrations, of course, in the works, things coming. So keep an eye out for those things. Lots of fun and exciting things to come. All right, let me talk quickly about monitoring, and then we'll actually dive into another hands-on, because I know it's been a little bit. There is currently no monitoring panel in free tier. Pro and enterprise tiers both have this, but free tier does not. The Halen Graph app, if you're familiar with that one, is not currently integrated with Aura. There's some things, again, behind the scenes and stuff, security things, that it just doesn't function with Aura just yet. So if you need monitoring access, there is a feedback link there. Feel free to send feedback there and say, I want monitoring on my free instance, or I need this or this. Any feedback you have for Neo4j Aura, this is where we track all of it. This is where our Aura team prioritizes things for adding or fixing. So please do feel free, anything you have there, dump there, and our engineers will see that and get working or prioritize what they can. I'll quickly show the monitoring page on the Pro tier. That's actually why I have a Pro instance up and running here. So if I go over to, there it is, yeah, just on the main page, metrics. So you see a little bit of CPU usage. You see some storage, which I have nothing on here because it was just an empty instance for today. No out of memory errors, hooray. Garbage collection times, nothing. Page evictions, and it tells you exactly what all these mean, and helps you kind of walk through that and kind of monitor. And then of course you can see how many hours or days you want to monitor on that. So that's kind of nice, but again, not on free tier, just on Pro and Enterprise tiers there. So with that, we're going to jump into the second hands-on. Hopefully, most of you have a database up and running and ready to go. I will show, kind of walk through all this together. If you've kind of want to do some on your own, that's fine too. But I will walk through all of this for those who want the hands-on walkthrough portion. We'll look at the Aura console, and then there's actually a repository out there that I've linked on my GitHub, where we can import the data to get started for some of our other hands-on sessions here in just a little bit. So I'll go ahead and switch over, walk through the Aura console, and then hop over and walk through the GitHub and copy paste that stuff into the browser to get our data loaded for the next hands-on. So let's do that. So go back to my main window here. And again, should be an Aura training or whatever you named your instance. It should have the free label next to it. I'm just going to click on that. There's a variety of ways to get here, but that's kind of the one I default to. And automatically, you're going to get kind of this import database. So if you have a dump file that you have sitting somewhere, a local one, and you want to import that into Neo4j Aura, you can drop that here. And I actually do have one on my GitHub repository. There's an exercise later down the road that you can play with that if you want to and have extra time. But this is one way that you can import data. If you already have a Neo4j dump file format, then you can just automatically push that over here and it will import everything and get it all set up for you. Connecting, this is really nice here. We have different languages that we can click, and it will actually give you sample programs that you can run. These actually do operate. We'll look at an example here in an upcoming hands-on, but you can copy paste all this code. The only thing you do need to change is it will give you the URI for your current instance because I'm sitting under that instance and it goes ahead and populates that for me, but you'll need to fill in the username and password. The username that's automatically set up for every database is going to be Neo4j, unless you have like a role-based access control set up. So Neo4j is probably what's going to be here. And then you'll need your individual password for the database, which is obviously not posted here for security reasons. So you will need to change those two lines, but it already defaults the URI in there for you. And then it has all the other information in there, language stuff in there that you can just run, and this should operate with no issues. So I'm kind of a Java user, so that's kind of what I default to. It also gives you running instructions. So anything you might need to download, anything you might need to have, then it walks you through exactly what you need to do in order to run the program. And then, of course, some references there at the bottom if you need links or want to know more information there. We will actually come back to this in another hands-on, so I'll kind of push on through this. Snapshots. So this is basically like an automatic backup. And it's taken every 24 hours for Aura free. And I believe, I don't remember if they're only, I mean, obviously I've got a few here, so I'm not sure how long they're kept. I know for Aura Pro, I believe they are taken every hour and they're kept 90 days, I believe. And then, or maybe it's 30 days. And then Aura Enterprise is every hour and 90 days or longer, or 120 days or something like that. So they're kept for longer periods of time if you're kind of more on the professional paid tiers and you need that constant backup. But for just our Aura free instance, it's every 24 hours, once every 24 hours. And then it'll kind of tell you, the bits of information here. This one hasn't run yet for me today. So this is just yesterday's, but you have the option to export it. And then it basically throws a dump file somewhere onto your file system, and you can use that dump file or just hold it for backup, or import it into a local database somewhere or another Aura instance. And then of course you have these restore buttons as well. So you can restore to certain points if you got data corrupted or if you ran a bad query or something like that, and you need to go back to data at a certain point in time. All you need to do is just pick whichever one you want to restore to and just click restore, and it should sync the database back to that point in time. And that's on all tiers. And then there also is, if you're on the Pro or Enterprise tier, let me see if I can show this. Then you go to snapshots. And there also is a take snapshot. So you can do this kind of as an instant. So in case you have a big process running, or you have some other systems maybe that might be down or something, and you want to take a specific snapshot at a certain point in time and not wait for the automatic ones, you can by all means do that with this take snapshot button. And then you get an instant as of this point in time dump file or snapshot that you can use later. But again, not available in the free tier, just on up. And then some settings that you get, you can clone the database. So if you have, let's say, a particular data set that you really are liking, or have it all the way you want it, and you want to clone that database for testing or maybe to run some other queries, etc., then you can do that by clicking clone. Obviously, if you're doing this from an Aura free instance, you will not be granted another Aura free instance, so you'll need to pay for the next one. So just a note on that. But you can do that, and this is also available in the Pro tier as well. Here to clone. Also, you get the resize capability in Aura Pro and Enterprise tiers, so you can resize your instance to any scale up, scale down, etc., depending on your needs. And that's available in Aura Pro and Enterprise as well, just not in free tier. And then you can also delete the database. So last resort, excuse me. I apologize. You can also delete the database. This is a no going back. It will wipe out your entire instance. You'll need to create a new one. But if you need to do that, or you want to delete, if you created a paid instance and you just did it for a month or so and you want to delete it, this would be the way to go about completely removing the database and inactivating it. There isn't currently a way to just pause and resume database services as needed. So the delete is the option for this to stop the charges or stop the service entirely. All right, so back to Aura Free. So that is that. Then there's these other tabs up at the top, which I've clicked on this database one a few different times now. This lists all of the databases that you have connected to your account. And we'll talk a little bit more about the panels and stuff on each database in just a second. And then, of course, you can create a database from here as well. Import, which gives you options to import data using the Neo4j admin tool. So you can, if you have a desktop, if you're using Neo4j Desktop already, or if you're dealing with Docker or a terminal or command line or RPM package and things like that, that you want to get into Neo4j Aura, this allows you to do those imports kind of all from a GUI, which is kind of nice. I've used this a couple of different times for importing for me from desktop, and it's worked really, really well. But if you have any questions or need anything on that, feel free to ping us too. But this is a really nice way to, if you have a Neo4j instance running somewhere else and you want to just bring that data on up to Aura, you can do that. Connect actually looks exactly like the database specific one that we saw earlier. The only difference really is going to be that it's not going to give you the URI. So it doesn't know which database. If you have 5 or 6 databases open, it doesn't want to pre-populate with a specific database here. So it doesn't pre-populate it here. However, if you choose the drop down here, it will tell you these are the databases you have. And if I select one, then it actually does go back and repopulate that URI for me. So this ends up being the exact same code as what we saw in the database connect section there. Just a couple of different ways to go about getting there, which is kind of nice. And then again, you have your tabs at the top for choosing which applications you want to run and which languages you're most familiar with. Feedback section, I believe, goes out to another link. Yep. So this is the feedback form that I mentioned. And again, you can fill out a new feedback. You can upvote other people's feedbacks. I think you might even be able to comment on those as well. And then you can kind of see what's prioritized and what's been trending on here for other people to submit as well. And again, our engineers, our product folks look at this and try to figure out what needs added and what people are asking for. So if you have anything you want or need, feel free to go straight here and fill that out. Okay, back to free tier here. And then of course, if you need help, there's a link to our docs, which we have some Aura docs now, exciting. And then it'll show all the information there, give you a few details about, getting started and up and running and how it works. And then there's some support stuff. So if you have questions, especially if you're on the customer end of things, you can go out to support and get some kind of predefined information here. This would be for all users. And then if you're customer support as well, there's a couple extra things that you can log in and request help on, fill out tickets and those sorts of things. But this is a good thing to kind of all getting started questions you might have about Aura. There's kind of some preset articles here that help you through that information. And then if you need more help, you can go kind of through the support portal if you're a customer, or to other channels if you're not. Okay, let's talk a little bit about just kind of this individual database pane here. So again, we talked a little bit about the name, whether it's free or not. You can actually edit this name, so I can change it to anything I want to at any time. And it'll give you a status of whether it's running or currently updating or something like that too. It'll either be a red or a green dot. I've seen gray. I think gray even shows offline. And then I don't know that I've seen any other color actually. So those are the only two. And then there's a connection URI here. So this is what you'll use to connect to your database. We'll look more in depth on this here in a bit. The region that it's currently running in, the version that it's on, and then the number of nodes and relationships in my database, which you should see this as well, because we haven't loaded any data yet. And so I'm going to actually walk through all of that with you live. So I don't have anything pre-populated here. It'll give you, let's see. Oh yeah, it gives you a little heads up note about there's Aura and Bloom. So if you do this drop down on Open With, you have two options now. There's Neo4j Browser and there's Neo4j Bloom. We'll go more into depth. We'll actually look at both of these here in just a bit. But these are the two options that we have that you can open and play with your database using. So now the other thing is GitHub. So let me go over and show this link again for anybody who might need it. And then I will come over here and actually go to that as well, because it's my account. So I don't want to just automatically default to stuff where you guys can't see it. So I go over to my repositories and right here at the top. So if you search Nodes 2021 Aura training, it should come up. It's a public repo, so everybody should have access to it. And feel free to kind of clone this, copy this, and do a git clone into a local local repository somewhere, or you're more than welcome to just copy paste files that you need if you want to. But for the driver example later, it might be nice to kind of have the code pulled down if you have access there, or if you can get into GitHub and things. Okay, so what we're going to do is once we get here, I have a load data.cypher. And we're going to click on that. There's a lot of resources here. We'll cover a few more of these as we go through today, so don't worry. And then what I need to do is go over to Aura, and I'm going to open my Neo4j browser tab here. And actually, scale this back up. Hopefully everybody got to GitHub okay. And I'll go ahead and connect to my Aura instance. So again, your instance, your free instance, you can click this open with button, and you should have two options. I clicked on Neo4j browser, and that's going to open another window over here, and it'll ask you to log on. So when you created the database back in the beginning, and I forgot to mention this, you should have copied the password for that and dropped it somewhere where you can remember it, and you will need it to log into your database when you connect to browser and Bloom as well. So that will be needed to get in, and this is just where we can run queries and interact with data. And again, I don't have anything loaded here as of yet. So hopefully everybody got there. Let me close a few tabs just so I don't have so much stuff open. And then back on the GitHub Cypher, then I can copy paste. I have to copy paste these individual. Actually, I don't know that I do. Maybe I can copy paste it all. I thought some of the schema stuff you couldn't, but I think that might just be our internal schema things. Yeah, it looks like it's going to run. So you should be able to copy the entire file out and put it into this browser input at the top. And again, exactly as you have it, exactly as it is in the file, it should not cause any problems there. And then you can either press enter, which is probably what I did, or you can click this play button over here to execute that query. And that will get us all the data loaded for us. And then if I click this database over here, I should see I've got some labels in here. So I have about 28,763 nodes in my database, and I have about 29,742 relationships in my database. And these are the relationship types I have. So the data should be loaded there. And if I go back, I wonder if I refresh this, if it'll resync. Not yet. It hasn't resynced the nodes and relationships here yet, but I do have the data loaded there. So that looks pretty good. And hopefully we should be in good shape for our next bit. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully while everybody's getting that loaded, we'll go ahead and talk about the next brief section here before we do the hands-on with the data. So we're going to talk about import, which we just did, in case you were wondering. But the things to know about import, Aura is going to be just a little bit different. There's a few different ways you can go about getting data in from the console, from the Aura console, which we actually walked through some of those. The dump file that I mentioned for import, if you have an existing Neo4j database somewhere, you can use a dump file to load that into Neo4j. You can run Cypher, which is actually what we just did to load data into Neo4j using the browser. And then we also have language drivers, which I showed you the programs in different languages. You can copy paste those out. You can write queries or load in flat files, etc., using the different languages, and then it will kind of pass that data up to Aura. So some external methods that you can do. Actually, I forgot to tweak this slide. So CloudTool is not currently in operation because of the built-in methods in the console that are allowed there. You can load data from public URLs, and you can load secure data. If your flat files or whatever data you're dealing with are not either public URLs or secure data, then you will get some access errors because, again, Neo4j Aura is locked down, tries to be very, very secure, and therefore we don't just let anything through the gates to load in. So there are a few differences if you're dealing with things like desktop or sandbox, although sandbox has a few restrictions too, but desktop, server, other types of Neo4j databases, there are a few differences between import there and import with Neo4j Aura. The first thing is import directory access is locked down, so you can't just go dump CSV files into the import directory if you've done that with other types of Neo4j. APOC import local files you can't use. So that's, again, all locked down for security reasons. Somebody can't use the APOC library to import local files from any desktop sitting somewhere. It will not store API credentials in the config. Again, major security risk there. You can't import with custom procedures as of yet. There are a few customer things that we'll kind of make exceptions for, and we'll kind of do some internal things, but everything right now is very manual because, again, we're trying to keep everything very secure and safe. You can't import with the Neo4j admin import tool. Again, this is kind of over the wire, funneling data back and forth. And if you're using the Neo4j ETL tool, it does work, but you have to have version 1.4.1 or greater. So you will need to have a later version of the ETL tool in order to get that one to work. But the ETL tool uses, it runs with relational databases or with the JDBC connector. And so it imports data from other databases into Neo4j as kind of a dump. But again, you will need a later version of that in order to operate. Previous versions of that aren't supported for Aura. And then a link down there at the bottom, those are our developer guides. So if you want more information on import with Aura and kind of some more details on the differences and other types of info and resource links, feel free to visit that page down there at the bottom. Okay. So here's our next hands-on. So we've already done that first step, which is the repository import. If you haven't done that, feel free to go on out to that GitHub repository, copy paste the Cypher and dump that into Neo4j browser. You'll need to open browser, and then we can start exploring data using some queries. Now, I actually do have a demo query file out there on my GitHub that I'm going to be copy pasting the queries into my browser to show you guys. But by all means, you can explore with your own queries or whatever you want to do to kind of traverse the data and play around with it. Totally up to you. But I'm going to walk through this way, and you're more than welcome to join me there as well. If you get done with all of that and you get bored and you want to try the dump file, with Aura Console to load the data in that way, you can by all means do that. There is a dump file sitting out in the repository. There's one that is from, it'll have a listing that says Aura on it. And then there's one that says desktop. The desktop one going into Aura may or may not work because of versioning. Because again, Aura has the latest and greatest. Some things sometimes get out of sync, and then dump files from other types of Neo4j aren't completely compatible. But the one from Aura should. I just took that dump file yesterday and put it there, so you should be able to load that in just fine. And I'll actually show that here in just a second, really quickly. So if you get bored and want to do that, that's fine. But I'm actually just going to stick with the queries for today. And then, of course, the link down there for the Aura import developer guide. You're more than welcome to go out there and visit for more information or resources, etc. So I'll quickly show the dump file, and then we'll move on over to the actual queries. So here I have an Aura export .dump, which it's kind of hard to see with the thing cut off at the end. And that one is the one that you should be able to use and drop that into the import in Aura and Aura Console, etc., and move through that no problem. The desktop one here may or may not work depending on Neo4j versioning and Aura compatible with desktop. So that one, if you want to do that at your own leisure, that's fine. I'm actually going to jump into this demo queries.cypher. And these are the queries that I'm going to be running this morning. So I'll take this first one. So we're just going to keep it pretty simple. to start out with. We've just got our data in there for now. And we want to see, okay, we have all these payments in our system. What are the dates on these payments? What's the kind of timestamp for this data that we have in our database? And so we get basically a minimum date, and then we get the maximum date. And so our minimum date, the first payment that we have is July 26th of 2018. Now, I will say Venmo has since shut down their payment system. So there is, sorry, that was very bad wording. They've shut down access to their API for a payment system. So you can't actually get the latest and greatest data. This happened to be a kind of a snapshot of data that somebody pulled into their GitHub from 2018, and that's where I got it. So if you're wondering why it's so old, that's the reason why, is Venmo actually doesn't let public users access payment API any longer. So minimum data is July 26th of 18, and maximum data, so the latest date, is August 7th of 2018. So we're dealing with about 2 weeks of data here. So this is something to kind of keep in mind as we run some of these further queries upcoming. So now let's just kind of move on down through the line here. So if we want to find the number of payments for each application, actually, it's only me. I didn't apoc.meta.graph. Remind of the data model. Sorry about that. So we have applications, we have payments, and we have users. Okay. So recall that we have payments. Users send a payment, and that payment is paid to another user. So that's why we have the kind of relationship circle here. And then we have that payment is being made using a particular application. So now with that in mind, let me go back and repaste my own query. So what we want to find out with this query is, what are the types of applications that people are using? So here we're looking at where a payment was paid using a particular application, and then we're going to return the application name. So that's the A, I'm using the variable, .name. We're counting up the payments as count, and then ordering by count. Now, this may or may not have been discussed in yesterday's session, but Cypher groups by the first thing that you list in the return if you have an aggregation in the query. So here I'm saying I want to count payments as count. It's automatically going to group by this application name. So when I run this query, what I'm actually going to get is different application names, so the unique ones in my database, and then it's going to count up all the payments that are related to that application name. So here we can see that most of our payments are occurring using the iPhone application. There's a few with Android, and then there's just a handful of this, both Splitwise and Venmo.com, which kind of seems, odd, right? You expect, these numbers are absolutely massive, but these, it's kind of unusual, especially to split payments. I would think that would be kind of interesting or kind of, helpful. But as far as why the disparity between, iPhone and Android, maybe you had a new iPhone come out recently, and so people were, had all new iPhones and they were using Venmo a lot. Maybe their Android app had a bug or something and was, getting worked on, so you didn't have as many people submit, or it could have just been, happenstance, coincidence. There could be a lot of things going into this, but for whatever reason, for these 2 weeks of data that we have, the bulk of them are using the iPhone application in order to import. So again, still kind of interesting that this is so low. I did actually do a little bit of research on that. And there's a TechCrunch article here that Venmo actually discontinued their browser, like desktop support of payments. So you can't submit payments via Venmo.com on a desktop any longer. And then I'm assuming Splitwise, also being a browser-based thing, was probably discontinued as well. And that happened, this article was posted in July of 2018, or excuse me, June of 2018. So they may have been phasing it out. And so it wasn't, that's why you only have just a few application payments being made, because it wasn't being used and it was getting ready to be deprecated. So one interesting tidbit that I found out, again, looking at the data, I'm going, that's kind of interesting. So doing a quick Google search on Venmo and their their Splitwise or their desktop payments and that article coming up. So again, your data kind of leads to more questions or leads to things you might want to ask. Then we can find dates for each application, payment dates. And so we can kind of see for each application that was being used, what are the minimum and maximum dates that you're getting, that you're seeing payments come through. So we have payments paid using application, again, same pattern, returning the application name, counting based on the application. Then we're grabbing also the minimum date created for the payment and the maximum date created for the payment. So getting the earliest payment, the latest payment. And then we're ordering by the count, which is going to be the number of payments per application in descending order. So this will give us, okay, we have Venmo for iPhone. Our first date is July 26th of 18. Our last date is August 7th of 18. So those are, remember, the minimum and maximum dates we have overall in the system or in our data. So that's good news. Same thing with the Venmo for Android. Even though we have a lot smaller number, you can see the earliest payment is the 26th of July of 2018. The latest payment is August 7th of 2018. So that's telling us that people are submitting payments with this method pretty frequently and through that whole 2-week time slot that we have. Then you'll notice that Splitwise, Venmo.com, you can see the latest payment here, or the earliest payment is July 26th. And the latest payment is also July 26th. So this is another indicator that, hey, this is being phased out. Either you didn't see any more payments after the 26th of July, or maybe they deprecated it at the end of July and that was just it. So that's why you don't see anything for August or for like the 30th of July or whatever. This may have already been deprecated and gone by the time you got to August 7th. I don't know. I actually don't know the date that they shut it down completely. But according to that article, it was going to be phased out and being worked on. This would be a month and a half later-ish. And so it may have already been done by then. So again, kind of better information to understand your data a little bit more. The next one is we just want to find some users who paid other users. Anything too fancy here. So we're just going to look for users who send a payment. That payment was paid to another user. We're going to return all of them. So everything here, the user, the relationship, the payment, the relationship, and the user. And we're going to limit just down to 30. That way we don't overload our browser because we know we have a lot of data sitting in the database, and that can get heavy for JavaScript. Okay, or for our front end. Sorry, JavaScript lovers. So we have our payments and our users here, and we can just kind of, and you can fix this a little bit where it looks a little nicer. If you click the payment up here and then just pick what you want to see. I actually want to see the note, the payment note, and then the user. And I like looking at the display name for the user because that way you can see who it is. And so then you can kind of traverse and you can, click on a node and get all the details for that node down here at the bottom. So all the properties that we have stored. And then you can do the same thing on payments. So you get the date created, the completed, the action, the note, the settled, and the type, the status. So whether it's been settled or maybe while it's pending or something else there. So information, you can just kind of feel free to navigate around the visualization if you want to, however you want to look at it. But I like to go use queries and dig into information. So find users who sent the most payments. So maybe I want to look through my network and say, okay, we have a bunch of users out here who send payments. Who are the most frequent ones? Who are the ones that are doing a lot with their applications? Maybe maybe Venmo would want to send them, a little bit of swag or a thumbs up or a thank you or whatever for using the app, or maybe they'd want to give them, access to new features or something like that. So we have users sending payments to other users. We're returning the first user's username and then counting the payments that individual user makes. So again, grouping by the property that we've first specified in our return statement. We're going to order by the number of payments in descending order, and we're only just going to pull the top 10 out of that list. So here, we have this person seems to be using, remember we have a 2-week time span here. So in 2 weeks to use a lot of Venmo, I think is kind of a good thing, but I would say it's not a usual thing. So to get like 50 payments in 2 weeks is probably kind of unusual for somebody to do. So here in 2-week time span, we get 8 payments that this person made, which I think is still pretty hefty. He's doing something where he's needing to pay users virtually or quickly, and so he's doing that using Venmo, which is pretty cool. But it's this person right here. So this gives us, and of course we can see, okay, the next closest person here only has 4 payments that they made, and these are these other folks down here. So maybe we'd only want to give, to anybody that had more than 5 payments or something like that. So that would just leave this user, or maybe we want to do anything more than 3. In that case, it would give us quite actually a long list down all the way down to here. So another interesting query to run, and kind of similar along this vein. We want to take that most payment user, which is our Connor Devlin 93, and we want to look at that person's subgraph, kind of get some more information about that person. So matching a username, sends payment, paid to user, and then we just want to return his subgraph, so all of those pieces, and we're just going to limit down to 30 nodes. Again, we don't want to overload our browser here so that everything returns quickly. And so here's what we have here. So you can see automatically things that pop out, at least to me, is that we have a couple of nodes here that he's paid twice. So there's a couple of payments. You can tell maybe these are a couple of friends, or maybe it's, looks actually like a couple of friends with some of the payment notes will have like, bills or water bill or electric or something like that. And so, you might pay that person, but I wouldn't think it, more than once in a 2-week time span, unless something's really not right. But there's a couple of people he kind of sends multiple payments to. So again, that might be something you want to dig into a little bit more, kind of get some more information about that, more about the payments, etc. So now let's find 2 different users who exchange the most payments. So not now just the person who sends the most, but maybe where we have, like we saw here, we have 2 users here that are exchanging multiple payments together. Can we find the person that has the most between their friend, basically, with them and their friend? So or possibly a friendship. Let me put it that way. Maybe not a friendship, but maybe that's what we want to find out. So here we have these users, Matthew and Michael, and there are 4 payments between them. So that's actually, again, to me, kind of a lot between 2 different users in maybe about 10 days to 2 weeks time span. There's 4 payments that pass between them, which seems kind of maybe unusual. I don't know, might be fine. But that might be something we want to dig into just a little bit more. And then, of course, we have several other kind of pairs of users down here that have 3 payments between them, which again seems pretty good to me. And then of course you could return more. I've just returned the top 10 here in this particular query. So now maybe we want to dig into a little bit more those 2 users that have 4 payments between them, this Matthew and Michael. We can dive into their information just a little bit more. So we're going to pull a particular user with a username of Matthew, which is what we returned here, and then sends payment paid to a user with this username, which is what we were looking at here. And again, we know they have 4 payments between them. So we need to return all the information about that. And we get this. So here's the 4 payments between them. And you get kind of some interesting stuff here. And so if you look at it, okay, this was made July 26th of 18. This was made July 26th of 18, and that's at 7:06 p.m. Let's see, this is 7:07 p.m. This was July 26th of 18, 7:06 p.m. And then here, 7/26, 2018, 7:07 p.m. So multiple payments right back to back that this person submitted to this other person. So maybe he was just kind of separating, okay, here's money for this thing, here's money for this thing that you bought, here's money for this thing, and paying him back that way. It could have been something else that, oh, I didn't send enough the first time, let me, send another payment. So like this Postmates, you had this Postmates 1 here, that's the note on it. And then there's a Postmates 2. So maybe that could have been the issue there. There could be a variety of other reasons. We don't really have enough data to tell us all the details there. But again, it's starting to be kind of interesting. Maybe he forgot. Maybe this person kind of loses things and needs to, forgets to send. Oh, I need to send that too. I'll make another payment to it really quickly, or something like that. Or the friend could have even been like, hey, I need the money back, or something like that too. So again, really interesting to kind of dig into these details, trying to understand the network and the graph that's around that. So we can drill into a payment. And we can actually do that to see what the application is. So I can just double click and you can see that the same application comes back for all 4 of them. So he used Venmo for iPhone, which is probably pretty typical, right? You wouldn't make one payment with an iPhone and probably switch to another payment on an Android, or something like that. You'd probably, unless you were switching phones, oddly. So, but this tells us then maybe, okay, this person might have this type of phone, or at least he's made 4 consecutive payments all with the same application. That's probably legit, and not a fraudulent thing like that. He's using the same thing, same app. So again, more information, more details. You can kind of track that down. And then the last query we have here, which is a little bit more complex, I will admit, but I'll try to explain it best as I can. So this is just looking at how long users have been sending payments to one another. So it's pulling the earliest date that 2 people sent a payment to one another, and then it's pulling the latest date that those same 2 people sent a payment to one another. So potentially finding long-term friends. Again, we're only dealing with 2 weeks of data here. So if we had like months of data or years of data, it would be kind of a little bit better, I think, for results. But we're looking at users who send payments to other users, where the user sending the payment to that same other user, I'm using you and you2, which is the same variables I've used up here, where that pattern occurs more than once. So basically where they have more than one payment between them. Taking the username of both users, the date created as the pay date, and ordering by that. So again, pulling earliest, latest, etc. I just got somebody commenting that it needs to be a little bit bigger. Hopefully that helps. And then grabbing those users, collecting all of the dates together as into a list, which is what I've done here. And then basically grabbing the first date in that list and the last date in that list. So again, it looks super complicated, but really what I'm doing is I'm pulling 2 different users, the payments that are between them, making sure that they've sent more than one payment to one another, because otherwise I don't really want to pull if somebody's just randomly sent a payment to another user. I only want to look at things that are recurring. Then I'm grabbing all of those dates for the payments between those users, grabbing them into a list, and then pulling the first and the last one. So the earliest date and the latest date. And then grabbing the duration between the first and the last date. So this is a Cypher duration function that I can calculate the distance in time between 2 dates, and then ordering by the duration in descending order. So this will basically grab the longest stretch of time between 2 users and their payments. So a lot of information coming back here. We have our username for user 1 and user 2. Then we have the first payment date, the last payment date, and the duration between those. So basically the maximum that people sent payments, more than one payment to one another, is 1,121 seconds. Now I could convert this into minutes or well, it wouldn't be quite hours yet. or maybe it would, but I could convert this into larger amounts that would make more sense here. But this is a lot shorter than what I expected. I kind of expected you'd have 2 users that would send some payments, 1 week and might send a payment another week, etc. And so you'd have kind of a longer stretch of time. But actually, really, it's only between a few seconds that somebody sent more than 1 payment to somebody. So maybe this is a trend. Maybe people kind of send a payment and they're like, oh, I need to send another one, or I forgot, or maybe I want to divide payments. I need to pay this person at the end of the month. I'm going to send 1 payment for this item and 1 payment for this item and 1 payment for this item, etc. So again, understanding habits and user behavior with the relationships that are in our database. Again, all of these demo queries that I just ran are here in my GitHub repository. You're more than welcome to play with those or to create your own queries and explore the data on your own there too. Okay, so if you did that, if you had extra time and loaded the dump file, great. But let's actually jump on into Neo4j Bloom. So we looked at browser, we ran a bunch of queries in browser, and we're going to do something similar, but using the Bloom visualization tool. So I'll dive into this, and I do have a link down there at the bottom of the slide for more information on Neo4j Bloom if you're interested in knowing what it is and kind of some of the use cases and things you can do with it. There's more information on our developer guide there at that link. But with that, again, I do have all of the demo stuff that I'm going to run in this Bloom patterns file sitting in my repository. So I'm basically just going to run most of what you see here, and you can do that too, or you can create your own patterns. That you're more than welcome to on that. But I'm going to walk through this, and you're welcome to walk through this live with me too. Okay, so I'm going to look at Bloom is, well, let me go back and pull it up. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I have my Aura free instance. I'm going to open Neo4j Bloom. Oh, it wants me to log in. So you'll need to log in. I have mine saved so I don't have to copy paste passwords on live screen here. So again, you will need your username and your password for the database copied into here in order to connect to your Aura free tier instance. And it might take a minute to load. You'll see this lovely kind of flower circle icon here that will bring us into Neo4j Bloom. Now, if you have not used Bloom yet, or if you haven't used it with Aura, you may see a different screen. You may see a perspective screen, which let me see if I can get there. Yeah, okay, so this may actually be what you see. And so it'll tell you, hey, do you want to have basically Bloom generate the automatic perspective? Do you want to create your own, create a custom one, etc.? What I always do is I just let Bloom define the perspective for me. So this is where if you have a ton of different data in your database and you want to specify, I only want to look at these certain types of nodes in Neo4j Bloom, then you can define a custom perspective here. But basically I want Bloom to go ahead and look at all the data in my database and say, generate a perspective based on what you see in the database. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the default generic. So you don't need to create anything custom there. Just let Bloom do that for you, at least for today. And then if you want to play with custom ones down the road, you're more than welcome to. Okay, so that is our perspective. You see we have 3 different node types in our database. So application, payment, and user, which is what we expect. That's what we saw in browser. That was the data model that we had, etc. So then this leaves us with kind of our main scene, is what it's called, for Bloom. And you can see there's a bit more information here along the right-hand side. You can do a little bit more refining and kind of some other buttons here, which we'll look at a bit more in detail in a minute. But let me see if I can, oh, that does not size up. Okay. So I can't zoom in anymore on Bloom. It doesn't let me zoom here. I'll have to ping somebody about that, I think. So let's just look at a few kind kind of, I guess they're sort of queries. So user payment user. So with Bloom, your queries are going to be near natural language. So it's going to be kind of off the cuff, more similar to how you would actually say, hey, I want to look for a user who has payments to another user. And so that's what you can specify here. You don't need to know Cypher syntax. You don't need to know query language type stuff. So here's user, it comes up, and we know that user is connected to a payment. And then we want to see who that payment was made to. So we're going to have another user on the other side. So if you click those things, then you should be able to hit enter to search. And it should bring up some data for us. Quite a lot of data. See this lovely visualization. So a lot of the visualizations that you'll see on Neo4j stuff, or if you see Neo4j visualizations, a lot of them are using Bloom because it has some really pretty patterns that show up just in real data. And so you'll see a lot of that. We like posting that stuff because it looks so nice. Okay. So you'll kind of see most of the time you'll get this purple nodes are our payments, orange nodes are our users. So you get kind of these purple nodes between two orange nodes, which is pretty consistent with what we expect. There are, I think, from when I was looking earlier, yeah, there's a couple right here actually, and we'll zoom in on this corner. So you can kind of navigate, you can drag the screen around, and then I'm going to use a couple of buttons here to kind of zoom in. So there's a plus and a minus sign to zoom in and out. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. So we have kind of an, not really abnormal, but an atypical, an atypical pattern here. Come on, come back up. Let's go. There we go. Hello. Okay, so we'll pull our user out, sends payment. And so this, it looks like our user sent 2 different payments to 2 other users. So most of our users in the database only have sent 1 payment. That's why you see that, orange, purple, orange kind of pattern all over the place. However, this particular user has sent more than 1 payment, and that's why we're seeing kind of this visualization here. If we move, and let me zoom out so I don't lose my spot, because we saw one other one out here, looks like the same thing. And this person actually sent 2 payments to the same user. So you have 2 people here sent more than 1 payment between them. And that's why this pattern kind of looks a bit abnormal than what we saw in the rest of the graph or in the rest of the visualization. So again, showing it in visualization like this, you can automatically see things that don't really line up or aren't what you expected. There's another kind of multi-hop pattern over here. And I think there's one over here. I was going to say there were a few of them, but there's not really too many. So they really stick out in this. And looking at the visualization, you can easily pick those out. So now let's go back over here. And this is a constant reminder for myself. I want to just like run queries and do stuff all the time. But if you actually go and run another query, let me just type in something to show you. Don't run this, or I guess it doesn't really matter. But then you're going to pop up with all these application nodes on top of the visualization that we just had. So you have to clear your scene in order to kind of clear the results back out, so then you can run another query. So just so you know, it's something I constantly battle. I automatically want to run another query and expect the scene to like re-clear and populate for me. And that's not the case. So I do have reminders in here for myself as well as for you in order to keep that data or keep the scene nice and clean. So okay, now we want to maybe look at where payments were made using the Android application. So let's go over back to our Bloom instance. We're going to look at payments and then Venmo for Android. And that should all come up for you. I'll explain a little bit more in detail in a minute why this particular, because we're searching for a property name now. And so you could maybe, search for, a username John or or something like that. And there's a way to do this, but it's very intentional. And I'll kind of fill you in a little bit more in just a second. But we're going to look at payments that were made with the Venmo for Android application. And I'm just going to click enter, hit the enter key. And that brings up this nice visualization here, which is mostly what we expect, right? So we have our application in the middle, and there's tons of payments in purple that have used that application. So nothing really looks abnormal here, but it's quite cluttered. We could probably write a better query or a better search in order to kind of pull, a smaller subset or something like that, but kind of give you an idea. There's quite a bit of data that can be handled. And the pattern here, the look of it matches what we expect it to. You have a bunch of payments tied with a single relationship directly to an application. Okay, so with that, again, I need to go back and clear my scene and then go from, let's do multi-hops. So let's see where we have 3 payments between users. So we have a user paying another user, paying another user, paying another user. So we want to grab kind of, and I have to count 1, 2, 3, 4 users. And of course, payments get interspersed in between. So I'm going to clear my scene, clean out my search bar, and then we're going to have 4 users. So user, I can hit the tab button in order to automatically select that first result it drops into. Go to another payment, go to another user, and I can use my arrow keys in order to select pattern options or suggestions that it shows up. And then payment, user. And remember, we have 4 users that we need to have here. We just have 3, so we need to add another list here like that. Okay, so now we get 1, 2, 3, 4 users with payments in between. If I can hit enter, this should bring up a pretty small subgraph because as we saw, most users are tied together with, 1, maybe 2 payments. But we're getting multiple here, kind of stringing together. So we have kind of this interesting node here, which we're going to dive into a little bit in a bit. But we have some more interesting patterns here now. So we've got kind of some odd things. There's 2 users that share 2 payments, and then that user paid 2 other users. So it kind of looks like, it almost looks like an octopus or squid type of shape. Oh, there's definitely an octopus right there. That one's pretty interesting. So you could drill into some of this info here. I'm actually looking for a particular one I like to focus on. It might be this one here. Yes, it is this one. Okay. So we have these 3 users here that have payments actually all between them. So it forms this nice little kind of circle, or in this case, oval here. But this is kind of interesting. Maybe we'd want to dig more into this, Kayla person. We want to inspect a little bit more, but you get all kinds of interesting shapes all around. And so there's lots of different things you can inspect, but I'm just kind of pinpointing this particular person. And let's see. What if we want to just search for Kayla Joseph and just find this person? So clear scene. Okay, so it actually does come up for me, which I'm trying to figure out why it does, because I don't think. Oh, because I probably didn't clean out my indexes yesterday. Sorry about that. Oops, sorry. So for most of you, it will just show up like if I searched, let me just search, let's say a payment status of settled. So if I search settled here, this is what it would probably come up with. And if you search this as full text search, it's probably going to tell you. So if you searched Kayla Joseph, for most of you, you're probably going to come up with this answer if you try to search that. And it's not going to give you any hints or like suggestions here. The reason for that is for properties that you want to do specific searches like this, value searches, you need to have an index in place. So that's actually what I did when we did that Venmo for Android search back in the load Cypher. I had an index here that said create constraint. Constraint also creates an index, by the way. If not exists on application, assert a.name is unique. So basically I'm saying here, I'm going to end up creating an index because indexes follow along with constraints when you create them, that is on the application name. So that's why I could search Venmo for Android, because that's the application name. And I've created an index on that, so it's easy for it to find. We don't have an index, however, on user name. We have it on user ID. So that's why that plain text search, if you try to search Kayla Joseph, probably won't come up with anything. So what you'll need to do is, go back to Bloom thing. And then I have this create index line here. And you'll need to go to Neo4j browser. So, oops, it logged me out. Thank you, Aura. Come on. There it goes. Okay, so on your instance, you open Neo4j browser, which I actually still had open, and connect. Okay, and then copy this index in. So I'm creating an index name. I'm calling it user display name for user on display name for that user. And if you click play here, I'll get an error because it's already there. An equivalent index already exists. Yours probably will not give that error unless you've skipped ahead here. But you should be able to create that. And then if you go back and refresh Bloom, which it might take it a minute to do that. But if you go back and refresh Bloom, then you should be able to run this Kayla Joseph query. And it should populate, hey, this is a user's name that you're typing in here. I can index that for you and bring this up. So I'll click that and then click enter, and that should return that person's node. So again, if you're wanting to search specific values for entities, you will need to have an index defined for that particular property in order to search it in Bloom. So that's what we just did there. So we've searched now, we've brought this person up, and you can run this show indexes in the Neo4j browser in order to see the indexes that you have created. You should then, I think there's 3 or 4 that we loaded with our Cypher script, and then this one that we just added. So you should be able to see it there. And then of course we did the refresh, and then we typed Kayla Joseph again, and then it was able to come up with an indexed search and return that person for us. Then now let's add to our scene. So we're not clearing our scene, we're actually adding to our scene. And we want to search Venmo for Android. Because actually, before I get ahead of myself here, let's expand this person here. Okay, so she made 2 payments, and I'm actually going to, select both payments. You can do that using the Command or Control key. Expand. You do have to be careful doing that expand, because if you have like the Venmo for iPhone, if I expanded this, paid using, there's like 8,544 nodes. So it'll clutter up your scene pretty quickly. But it'll tell you exactly how many nodes you're going to get when you expand. Okay, so this Kayla Joseph person looks like she made 2 payments, and she made them using this Venmo for iPhone application. So maybe we'd want to find out, okay, we know she used the iPhone application. What's actually the shortest path between her and the Android application? So we can clear our scene. Let's pull up our Kayla Joseph again. And go ahead and pull that. And then let's pull up our Venmo for Android application here. Hit enter to search for that. Come on. There we go. So now we have our 2 entities here. Again, as far as we can tell, totally unrelated. But now if we select, and it'll kind of give this little blue halo when you select the node, and then you can either hit Command or Control and click the other node that you want. and then right mouse click to get this, and then do path option, shortest path option. So this will pull the shortest path between these two entities. So we have our Venmo for Android, we have our Kayla Joseph, and this is the shortest number of hops we get to get between these two, what seems unrelated entities. So again, Kayla made a payment using the Venmo for iPhone. There was another payment being used for Venmo for iPhone, which there are, and you may get different results with shortest path, by the way. It just kind of depends what Cypher does behind the scenes to pull the data back. So Venmo for iPhone, there's a lot of payments for Venmo for iPhone, so you could get a lot of different payment IDs here. It was paid to this other user, looks like, that then had another payment that used Venmo for Android. Some of you may get a blank node coming here to this one. And that's okay. What has actually ended up happening is it surfaces some bad data that we have in our database. So if you see an empty node here, you can double click on it and it will pull up information. And all of this is probably blank. And that's because there was something in our data set that said, okay, this payment made a payment to, or this user made a payment to another user, but we don't know anything about this user. And so it's just all been blanked out. And therefore you kind of end up with this kind of default or ghost user that then you have a ton of payments that are actually tied to that person. That was that little cluster that we pulled up. If I clear my scene and just search, what was it? User payment user, I think is what we did earlier. User payment user. And so when this returned, I can actually show this in case some of you got this result. Oh, actually, no, it was the one where we did the multi. So let me pull that back up. It was 4 users. And you guys, see, I almost forgot. I clear my scene. And then now use this. I would have had a very clustery mess. So this that's tied to all of this stuff, you can see this kind of really dense web over here. This node may have been what you got back in the shortest path. You can see there's no information there. So it's kind of like a dummy or default node that's showing there's some bad data in our database. We know all these payments were made, but we don't have info about the user that they were made to. So again, it surfaces kind of some bad data, but just in case you got kind of this empty node in that shortest path query, this is all that this is. So it might be some data cleanup stuff, might be, something we, have to write queries to avoid, etc. But that then is Neo4j Bloom. We've walked through all of that then. So let's hop back over to our presentation here. So now we're going to talk a little bit about connecting to the database, and we've actually got a couple more hands-on stuff, so I'll try to keep moving along. There are some different ways that you can connect to the database. You can do that through Neo4j Desktop. If you're familiar with that, that's kind of a downloadable app that then you can manage connections to different types of databases, whether that's local, whether that's remote. It helps you do some admin stuff. It allows you to connect to graph apps and things that I have listed there. So Desktop is kind of a developer's hub for managing database connections. You can also connect to Neo4j Aura using Cypher Shell, which is a command line tool. It allows you to run Cypher at the command line instead of using browser like we've done so far. And then, of course, you can connect using different language programs. So things like Java, Python, even more like frameworky or other types of things like Spring, GraphQL, and other sorts of things. There's lots of different ways that you can connect to Neo4j Aura, and from applications, of course, too, using our drivers. Our language drivers. Okay, so that's the different ways to connect. We're actually going to dive right in with another hands-on. I guess I should have mentioned Neo4j Desktop too. If you do not have this downloaded, feel free to just kind of watch along with me. I will walk through all of these steps. If you do have Neo4j Desktop downloaded and ready, that's perfect. And then we'll walk through connecting to our Neo4j Aura free tier instance from Neo4j Desktop and show you that. And then, of course, there is a link if you want to see how to do this later there at the bottom. There's instructions there on how to connect to Neo4j Desktop from Aura as well. So with that, I'm going to open my Neo4j Desktop application, which I have down here on my dock. And it depends on which screen it might pop up into. Of course, it went over onto this other one. So I'm going to bring this up, and I'll zoom in here in just a second when everything gets up and loaded. So this is kind of the hub. You can connect to a variety of databases. You can run graph apps. You can kind of manage your database instances a little bit. If you have local ones, of course, there's not much to be managed with Aura, right? So I can zoom in a little bit here. Actually, I'll go full screen here. So what we're going to be doing, you have kind of your projects tab here that we just had open. There's your databases that'll show you all the versions and the number of databases instances that I have in each version. Obviously, I've got some old ones out there I need to go clean up. There's a tab here for graph apps, which we'll talk more about here in just a bit. There's a help section, so some links and feedback stuff. Notification center, so it'll tell you when there's updates or graph apps need updated. Some settings that you can uncheck, recheck, change developer tools and put in a developer mode there. There's software keys, which, by the way, are automatically recurring now for both Desktop and Bloom. So you shouldn't need to enter these two software keys at least. You just, I think, need to add Bloom to Desktop. So if you just downloaded Desktop, totally new to it, then Neo4j Desktop might be the only one that you have there. But you can add other software keys if needed there too. And then just a little bit about Neo4j, which is the host and the creator of this application. So you'll have privacy policy, a link to Neo, release notes, notice and licenses, all that kind of good stuff. But we're going to go back to our projects tab up here. And I have a few different projects open because I like to kind of categorize my databases, and I've got a bunch that I have listed here. And so I can kind of click through and just kind of show kind of all that I have sitting around. But I'm going to be dealing with inside a particular project, which is just my generic project that I use for demo type stuff. And I've got my databases listed here, and then different files, which you can see the dump files I created for this class and for some others. But we can create a new project or a new database within a project. We're going to create a remote connection because we have Neo4j Aura. And so it's going to be a remote database, so it's not going to be created locally. And so I want to create this and call this, let's just say training Aura remote. And you can name this anything you want. Now, the connect URL, this is for a local database. That's why it's using the local host, or that's not what I wanted to copy, the local host URI here. But I mentioned that we would need this URI later. So we're going to go back to our browser here. And we need to go to our Aura database here. And this connection URI that we had here, you can copy that by copying to the clipboard, or you can highlight and copy if you wish. And then let me see if I can go back to desktop. Perfect. Then I can use this here and just paste that into this line. Then if I click next, then I need my username and password. So username, Neo4j. Oh, and I don't have my password up. So 1 second, I gotta log into my password manager and get it copied. But hopefully you have yours laying around somewhere. That would be handy. And then, yep, okay, copy that. And it shouldn't paste, yep, does not paste the plain text. It's automatically going to use an encrypted connection. And then we just need to click save. And then if you kind of mouse over, it'll show you, hey, it's trying to spin up and get ready. And that actually didn't take very long at all. So the difference here, you can kind of see you have this local database, which is kind of these little database icons, but then your remote database actually shows like a little cloud. So, hey, your database isn't located here. This is a remote connection, which is kind of nice. And then you can actually connect to that database and start that up. And if yours is still, spinning up and stuff, that's fine. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes, but it'll show an active kind of button here when it's ready, and it'll let you click disconnect if you want to shut it down. And then from here, you can open different graph apps. You can open Browser and Bloom, which we've already talked about. And you can, by all means, do that from desktop. Although I think going from Aura console is easier, but there's lots of different ways that you can connect. And we'll talk a little bit more about this actually here coming up, because we'll look at graph apps and applications and all sorts of things. But now we've actually connected, and the connection is live to our Aura free instance, and we can do this all from desktop. So with that, I will switch over, and yeah, that kind of wraps up that kind of hands-on there. I talked a little bit about Cypher Shell, or I mentioned it. This is included in Neo4j. You can download it completely separately. If you go out to, I believe it's on neo4j.com on the download page, you can drop in the package for Cypher Shell and use that command line tool. You can run Cypher statements for admin or data load. I kind of mentioned that, and it's all command line. You will need your username and password yet again. So if you want to know more information about that, there's a link down there at the bottom. Again, on our developer guides, we have kind of a walkthrough of using Cypher Shell at the command line that then you can connect, from basically from anywhere using the Cypher Shell into your Neo4j Aura instance there. So that is all available. We're not going to do that today because it's a little bit more hassle to get stuff downloaded, but that is available. And then graph apps. I mentioned these when we were looking at desktop. These are single page applications with HTML and JavaScript. You typically use Neo4j Desktop to interact with the database. You can also do it from a web page as well. So you can access all of these graph apps from our web browser link there, install.graphapp.io. You can see the full list. There is also a way to do it in desktop, which is what I'm going to show here in just a second. And you can build your own graph apps. So you can create your own single page application for interacting with data in the database. Lots of community members and partners and even internal Neo4j employees have done that and created quite a list that you see when you open that web page and see the graph app gallery is what we call it. So if you want to know more information about that, again, there's a developer guide link down there at the bottom of this page, and there'll be more resources linked to it later on as well. But we'll check those out here. So what we're going to do is, if you're in Neo4j Desktop, we're going to start there. We will open the graph apps gallery and kind of just take a look at graph apps. Now, I will take a quick note because of a lot of the security restrictions in Aura. There aren't too many graph apps that operate with Neo4j Aura today. So just be forewarned, if you go in and try to select, different graph apps, they may or may not work with Aura. That is to be expected because of the lockdown security. But by all means, create your own or play with the ones that do operate there. So with that, let's take a look at this. I'm going to switch back over to desktop. And again, we have our connection hopefully running to our remote instance to Aura. And then I'm just going to drop down, and I already have some graph apps installed. Since you may or may not have graph apps installed, you may not see this list. You may just see Browser and maybe Bloom. But to do that, I can go over to the Graph Apps button here, this kind of almost, I guess, kind of category box icon. And then I have a bunch already installed, but the Desktop Graph Apps Gallery should be available. And then, oh, it didn't. It went over to my other screen. One moment. I need to size down this. Oh, why didn't it size it down? There we go. Okay, bring this over. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the full Graph Apps Gallery. So this is the full list of all of the graph applications that are available. And I'll kind of give you a note down here on how to install these. The one that I did was charts, which is a good one that I know operates with Aura today. So you can click the install button. There's also, if you want to know more, I think about the user who created this, yes, and then the repository link. So if you want to see the code that builds this graph app, there's a kind of some documentation or tutorial or guidance here if you click on that. And then you can install a link for Neo4j sidebar, which I believe is that for that link in desktop that you see. So you can try any of those methods in order to install this. In fact, actually, if I click that, oh yeah, it brings up a web page that has basically the JSON that you can copy in for installation there. So with that, you should be able to click install, and then that should bring you back over here, and it should show up over here on your graph apps list along the left-hand side here. And if that's the case, then you should have the option to click on it, which will open it. Or you can also go back to your database projects and do the drop down on your database, and you should see it show up here as well. So there's a couple of different ways to get to it. And again, it's pulled it up in another tab. So one moment, or on my other screen. And then I can tell, okay, this graph app, okay, I want to connect to the project and the training Aura remote database and connect. And you can see I've created a sample dashboard here. Haven't done anything, but you can create charts and visualizations and things against your Neo4j database for kind of analyzing metrics or looking at your data in different ways. And so you can build those dashboards here. And again, this application works against Neo4j Aura, which is kind of fun and lots to explore here. I actually haven't gotten to do as much exploration of this app as I really would like to. But there's tons of fun with a lot of these graph apps. And again, you can create your own, write custom ones and do a lot of cool things with that. So, I only have just a few minutes left, so we'll dive in very quickly to talking about connecting applications to Neo4j Aura. You will need your connection URI, your username, your password, and any dependencies that you might need. The Aura console does contain examples. We saw the code for each language that you can copy, paste, pull down, and run. There's steps to reproduce there, even on the Aura console as well. And you can deploy those locally or remotely as well, your applications. There's more information on that link on the developer guide that I've linked there at the bottom. And so you can check more of that information out. I do have one more hands-on, which we'll try to get through relatively quickly here, or you can continue to do self-paced after the ending of this. But we can go into our Aura console. You can go over to or click on the instance, go to the Connect tab, which we showed at the beginning, and I'll walk through all of this. Pick the language that you want to do, and then follow the steps along the right-hand pane for that. And again, the link all the way at the bottom of the slide there is connecting with a driver. So it'll kind of walk you through those steps as well. But I think the Aura ones actually do a great job. I've never had any trouble there. Back up if you are not able to copy paste resources or don't feel you have the time, etc. If you have my code pulled down, I actually have the Java example in that. And you can basically just follow the last couple of steps on the Aura console and run that program and see that it operates. It is copy pasted directly from the Aura console. All you'll need to do is fill in your username and password and the database URI that you're using in order to get that to run. So I will show this really quickly. If I go over, oops, wrong browser tab. I've got too many things open now. Let's see. There it is. Okay, so browser tab, and I'm going to click on my free instance. I can click the connect. Remember, you can also use the connect up here, just a little bit more, a couple more steps. I prefer Java, so I can copy paste this example right here, and then follow the information over here. You'll need to download a couple of driver artifacts, copy paste some code, build the file, run the file. and then it'll actually walk you through the code and what it's actually doing there, the example that you just copy pasted. And some more information there. Again, if I pull this in, and actually I will open up a terminal window. And this is super small, so 1 second, let me get to my file location. So projects, I have this under nodes 2021 Aura training. So this is my GitHub repo that I just pulled down. Driver example, and you can see I have the 2 jar files that the Aura console said that I needed, and then I have the .java file that I copy pasted, and then when I run the compile, that's what's going to give me the class. So I can literally go over here. Of course, I have this so zoomed up, it doesn't show. So I can do this build. Of course, I would need to copy paste in my username and password. So I guess I won't do that live. But then you should be able to run the compile here using the Java-C, and then the run command here with Java. And that should operate, and it'll return a couple of results because it's running a person query and returning results back. So that all operates. I apologize, I didn't have time to actually walk through and show it to you today. But feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or if something isn't working correctly. I'm happy to answer those. So we will wrap up then with some resources. Again, the Aura feedback request form. If you want some other features or needs, something's buggy or needs to be fixed, do feel free to reach out there. Again, our engineers and our product folks look at that and prioritize what they need to change or update or add based on that. The Aura documentation is available, and then developer guides, which we saw to walk through most of the exercises that we did today. That's all kind of text-based walkthroughs. Support guides for Aura, I showed that's also available on the Neo4j console that we looked at. If you want to review basically everything that we did today, that is available there under the developer guides. It's all of the Aura stuff that's listed there. We've basically covered most of that today. And again, if you want to review all the live exercises and things that we did, the queries and such that we ran, that's all available on my GitHub repo, and everything should be up to date, with the exception that I will update the link for the presentation to this presentation here later today. So again, if you have any questions, my contact information is up there in the upper right-hand corner. Feel free to ping on the chat or ping any of us Neo4j folks after the fact. We're happy to answer what we can. And with that, I will turn it back over to Alex and let him wrap up.